Tonight, the time for talking has passed, says Donald Trump. He doesn't want an endless war, but it's in Iran's interest to inflict as high a cost as possible. So what happens next? Israel's attacks two capitals, Tehran and Beirut, with millions of people urged to leave their homes. Inside Iran, 180 schoolgirls killed by airstrikes as they studied are buried by their families. The UK scrambles a destroyer to defend its airbase in Cyprus as an RAF jet shoots down an Iranian drone, but...
So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
That's Donald Trump lashing out at Keir Starmer over his decision not to get involved in the initial attack. And as the leaders squabble, gas prices are surging and global markets are tumbling. So what will it take to end this war? I'll ask the former head of the CIA and the man who advised Donald Trump, coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening from Jerusalem. I'm Yalda Hakim. I just want to start tonight with a question. What do you do when you're attacked by the most powerful nation in the world? If you're outgunned and outmatched and most of your senior leaders are killed, well, you lash out in the only way you can. You make the war so expansive that your opponents have no choice but to declare an early victory. That's what Iran is counting on tonight. Thousands of missiles have been sent its way since the war began. And in the past 24 hours, hundreds have targeted Tehran. In response, Iranian missiles and drones have been targeting oil refineries and ports across the region. Just have a look at how traffic through the key shipping channel, the Strait of Hormuz, has slowed down. This war will hit economies in the Gulf and drive up prices for consumers in Europe and the United States. That's why Donald Trump now says the U.S. Navy will escort ships if necessary. But it's clear succession planning isn't the U.S. president's strong point. Just have a listen to what he admitted today.
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead.
So he wants regime change, but he doesn't know who will lead, and he's still not clear on his end goal. So how will it actually end?
Can they create conditions in Iran where some element of the regime forces, perhaps the regular military, galvanize the people and other capabilities to actually topple the regime?
That was the assessment of the former head of the CIA. We'll hear from General Petraeus later in the program, but first Cordelia Lynch has our main report.
The skies over Iran black with smoke, its ballistic missile infrastructure and arsenal steadily blowing up. This, an army facility in Tehran. In Miravan, an intelligence site obliterated. And here, the wreckage of a building where Iran's assembly of experts were meeting to decide the next supreme leader. Far away in Washington, Donald Trump called the war he helped start stupid, but justified.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that.
Something else he feels very strongly about is Keir Starmer delivering this scathing broadside.
We are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
RAF F-35 jets did shoot down an Iranian drone in Jordan, but for America's leader, it's far too little, too late. This war has rapidly opened a Pandora's box. Iran now targeting 11 countries, drawing out the conflict, expanding the battle, driving up the jeopardy.
This period will pass, and Iran will come out of this historic test victorious. Don't have any doubts. Our civilization, our history, and the God of our homeland will make us victorious. We will defeat the evil.
This is Fujairah oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest oil storage sites in the Middle East. Oman was also hit, a drone smashing into Duqm commercial port. This is the broadest war the region has ever seen. But another big shift to watch is on the ground in southern Lebanon. Israel seizing territory. The IDF say it's just a tactical measure on the border, not part of a wider ground operation. But it could soon become one. For months, there's been speculation about Israel making a major move on Lebanon. When Hezbollah decided to enter the fray by firing rockets, it gave them the chance to justify getting troops on the ground. It is an emboldened nation now trying to seize the opportunity to remake the region. They may frame it as a war of necessity, but it's given them choices, and with no deadline. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
Well, tonight we're live in Europe with our correspondent Alistair Bunkle, who joins us live from Cyprus. But let's begin with our US correspondent Mark Stone, who joins us from Washington. And Mark, you and I were earlier listening to President Trump when he gave that press conference as he was meeting the German Chancellor. It was quite something, wasn't it? I mean, just as extraordinary as many of the other press conferences in that Oval Office.
Yeah, I mean, Starmer wasn't there for it, but it didn't stop the president, as Cordy said there, a broadside on Keir Starmer, on the special relationship, so-called. I mean, I think if we were saying, as we were over the past couple of days, that it has been strained, we can see that now absolutely clearly. The British government are putting a positive spin on it. I'm privately speaking to people who tell me, look, the special relationship is deeper than one president. It has lots of strands. There are, of course, strains at times, like there is now on the geopolitical aspect of the special relationship. But Britain must do what it believes to be in the interests of the British people. And it was not, according to Keir Starmer, in the interests of the British people to get involved in the initial action that the Americans and the Israelis took on Iran at the weekend. So that's their position. But there's no question it is under some considerable strain. And at the heart of it is this issue of intent and just how immediate and how real the threat from Iran actually was. Donald Trump saying, in the State of the Union last week ago, feels like a long time ago now, that the Iranians had the capability to hit Europe and would soon have the capability to hit the United States. We've heard Marco Rubio saying that they are and indeed Steve Witkoff saying that they were days away from obtaining or being able to build a nuclear weapon. No evidence has been provided for that. Marco Rubio yesterday, he kind of suggests, well, he didn't suggest, in fact, he did say in black and white up front, he said that the reason that the Americans went at the weekend and took the action at the weekend was because they knew that the Israelis were going to strike and that that Israeli strike would prompt an Iranian response, which would be an imminent threat to the United States. So he was putting the onus on Israel, almost seemed to be suggesting that American foreign policy is dictated by Israeli foreign policy. That's caused one hell of a storm here in the United States. And it prompted Marco Rubio to try and course correct when he was speaking on Capitol Hill this afternoon. Have a listen.
The president had already made a decision to act on the timing. The president acted on the timing that gave us the highest chance of success. And that's what you're seeing play out right now. You're seeing it play out right now, and you'll see it in the days to come. We will systematically take apart their missile program. We will destroy their ability to sponsor terrorism, by the way. We will destroy their factories. We will destroy their Navy. Those objectives are going to be met. We're well on our way to meeting them. It will not be easy. There will be a price to pay for it. But that is a much lower price to pay than having a nuclear-armed Iran.
Marco Rubio, as you say, Mark, speaking there, he talked about the price being paid. I mean, this has escalated across the region, but it has also impacted that all-important Strait of Hormuz and the shipping lanes there. Now the president is talking about, the U.S. Navy escorting some of those ships if they need to.
Yes, I mean, this has escalated in many different ways. Some of the escalation the Americans must have expected, but even, Donald Trump admitted that he did not expect the Iranians to use drones to hit civilian infrastructure in countries which Donald Trump said were kind of neutral before all this kicked off. He's talking about Gulf Arab countries who didn't necessarily want America to take action now because they knew they could be under threat. And we've seen all of that playing out in Dubai, in Qatar, in Abu Dhabi, and in Kuwait. And now, clearly, one other aspect to this is oil prices, the global economy, and access to the Strait of Hormuz, which you can see there. Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social over the past hour or so. We've got the post here. He says, if necessary, the United States Navy will begin escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible. No matter what, the United States will ensure the free flow of energy to the world. The United States' economic and military might is the greatest on earth. More actions to come. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Yalda, the other thing that I should tell you about is that in the last couple of hours, I've been on a call with two senior American or White House officials speaking on condition of anonymity, so we can quote what they said, but we can't tell you who they are. But I can tell you that they were at the very heart of the negotiating process between America and the Iranians prior to the point at which Donald Trump called it all a day and activated the military action. Now, these two officials said to us lots of things, three things that I think are interesting as they try to shape the narrative and the justification for why the president took military action at the weekend. The first thing they said, and these are quotes, is that they, Iran, basically could have been days or weeks away from a weapon if they would have put the effort into it. And they had all the capability to accomplish that. So the view of these people, these officials, speaking under anonymity, they say that Iran was days or weeks away from the ability to create a weapon. The second interesting point, Iran's proposal was like Swiss cheese because there were lots of holes that they were able to go through. In other words, they were taking the Americans and the negotiators for a ride. The third point, which I thought was interesting, was that the American negotiators said to Iran, OK, if you are genuinely wanting just a civil nuclear program, we will supply you with the nuclear fuel for that program. And the Iranians turned around and according to the Americans, said it is our right to be able to enrich ourselves. And the Americans took that as being, the Iranians are taking us for a ride. They want to create a nuclear weapon. So interesting points there from the Americans justifying post-fact why they took action in Iran at the weekend. Of course, the British and other Europeans have been quite clear that they do not believe that initial action was lawful. And the reason they don't believe it was lawful is because they don't agree that there was an imminent threat from Iran.
Mark, really fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for all of your reporting there. Let's bring in our Alistair Bunkle, who joins me live from Cyprus. Extraordinary listening there to Mark, Ali, about the reluctance of European allies, of the UK, of France. Now, that's damaged in many ways the relationship between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. But as reluctant as Keir Starmer may be to enter this, mission creep feels like it's almost inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially Keir Starmer tried to turn his back on what was happening, taking what he feels was a very principled stance, one rooted in international law, something, of course, that he's made a career out of as a lawyer. But, Britain's been dragged into this, and it's no surprise. I mean, you just need to look at what Iran had always threatened to do in the event of a major war like this, and they had said that they would try and spread it across the Middle East. Look at Britain's military footprint across the Middle East. Look at the number of Britons who are either living or holidaying in the Middle East. And one way or another, it was inevitable that Britain, as so many other countries are finding, would get caught up in it. And the military base here, RAF Akrotiri, which is a major outpost, so half an hour's flight from Lebanon, 35 minutes flight from Tel Aviv. So you're very, very close to the centre of a lot of the action. It also houses American forces, has done for years, not just because of what's going on right now. And so the fact that it became a target for 2 drone attacks on Sunday and Monday should be no real surprise. And yet the British government didn't react very quickly. Now they are sending a ship to the Mediterranean. It will take 6 days, but that will help defend against any ballistic missile attacks. Helicopters to help defend against any drone attacks. The French have just announced tonight through Emmanuel Macron that they're sending an aircraft carrier to the eastern Mediterranean. And so the European countries that wanted to stay on the sidelines, didn't want to get dragged into a war that may be lasting a long time, maybe or maybe not against international law, well, they are finding themselves very much a part of it one way or the other, whether they like it or not. And the British have been involved in the skies, but in a defensive capacity, shooting down drones over Jordan, over Qatar, and over Iraq. Whether or not this is mission creep in terms of will Britain start striking Iran with America and Israel, at this stage I doubt it, but very much if Keir Starmer felt that Britain could stay on the sidelines, both in terms of militarily but also politically, diplomatically when it comes to Donald Trump, well, he was mistaken.
Ali, as always, thank you so much. Now, the number of people known to have been killed in this war is fast approaching 900. The vast majority are in Iran, where the Red Crescent Society has reported at least 787 deaths. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes have killed 40 people, while retaliatory strikes by Iran on Israel have killed 11. There have also been deaths in strikes across the region since the start of the war, including 3 in the United Arab Emirates. And the Pentagon has confirmed that 6 U.S. personnel have been killed after a strike on an operations center in Kuwait. Well, today inside Iran, funerals were held for 180 schoolgirls killed on the first day of U.S. and Israeli strikes, as Lisa Holland reports.
Their tiny coffins were piled one on top of another and driven through the center of the southern Iranian city of Minab in a mass funeral. Iran says more than 180, mostly little girls of primary school age, died with their teachers as they studied. They gathered as far as the eye could see, angry and distraught at such a devastating loss of life in what is the deadliest single incident since hostilities began last Saturday. This was the aftermath of the school attack. Israel says it's not aware of any Israeli or American strikes in the area at the time, but there's been an international outcry that a place of learning has been bombed without accountability. But these are attacks Israel has claimed responsibility for. The fighters are in the sky. They're hitting hard, says an Iranian who filmed the bombardment. Israel says it destroyed the command center for Iran's entire armed forces as it hit the capital in wave after wave of strikes. Barakella, meaning bravo or well done, he says. Israel's Air Force has also been in action, picking off missile launchers and defence systems from the air. There's already widespread damage, but as Israel and America warned more than 1 million people to leave their homes as it tries to dismantle the regime's infrastructure, there was defiance on the streets.
Curse be upon your ancestors, Trump. The Americans think they can force us to surrender with missiles, but they can't do this kind of things. We will definitely defeat them. We're not afraid of being killed.
Iran isn't done yet. The Fars news agency, which is close to the IRGC, the military defenders of the regime, released this footage, which it says shows huge underground stockpiles of drones and missiles ready to be deployed. We can't independently verify the pictures. We don't know when it was filmed or even if the images are real. What we can say is Iran's propaganda war rages on as Donald Trump doubles down on his campaign from the air. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Let's cross to Tehran now and speak to Abbas Aslani, editor-in-chief of Iran Nuances, an online news platform in Iran. Mr. Aslani, thanks very much for joining us here on the programme. I just want to begin by asking who exactly is running Iran at the moment following the killing of the Supreme Leader? Mr. Aslani, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I was just asking, you're speaking to us from Tehran at the moment. I'm just asking who is currently running the country?
Well, according to the Constitution, now an interim leadership council has been formed, which includes President, Chief of Judiciary, and a cleric member from the Guardian Council who has been introduced by the Expediency Council. They will run the country by the time that the Assembly of Experts, which is a body comprised of roughly 88 bodies that who are responsible to elect a new leader. By the time that that assembly, elects a new leader, this interim leadership council will run the country in terms of domestic developments, foreign policy related issues, or everything which deals with the, let's say, security aspects as well. However, other institutions are also in place and they are making decisions or executing their tasks as business. However, there has been some vacuum, like loss of the leader or high-ranking commanders, and there are efforts underway in order to fill those gaps, which are difficult. But according to pre-planned, that those security-related issues are going.
Mr. Aslani, your connection isn't great, but I'm going to keep going. In terms of that vacuum that you're talking about, the talk of regime change in the United States by the Trump administration, in Israel by the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, it's something that they have made clear. Is there a sense in Iran that this regime has been weakened, given the number of bombs that have been dropped, the key sites that have been hit, the supreme leader has been killed? Is there a sense that there is going to be regime change because this particular government has been weakened so much?
Well, at the time of a foreign intervention, what we are seeing from the Iranian society and public is to unite against a foreign aggression. And we have been seeing gatherings in different cities across the country, which has been condemning that foreign aggression mostly. There might be a number of people who are not happy with the current political system. But majority, even those who might be critical of the situation and the system, they do not welcome a foreign aggression. And that's why I would say that the chances of a regime change, given the recent developments, are not high, because through military aggression, this cannot happen. It needs public backing. In the meantime, we are seeing that the interim leadership council was formed immediately, and this signals a kind of, let's say, continuity rather than a change in this in the country. And this infrastructure has been built over decades, so it cannot go overnight. And even in the absence of very important figures in this, political system, we are seeing that it is operating, and Iran, even in terms of the military field, is responding.
Can I just ask about the mood within Tehran, given the scale of the bombardment and the death toll is rising? Are you seeing more of the Revolutionary Guard, the Basij, out onto the streets, trying to maintain law and order and control? Mr. Aslani, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry, my internet connection is not that much stable. That's why
That's okay.
But I can hear you now.
That's okay. I was just asking about the mood in Tehran. Are we seeing the Basij out on the streets, the Revolutionary Guard, the police trying to maintain law and order and control, given the level of instability in the country right now?
Well, in terms of the general, situation in the capital city, as well as maybe in many other cities, we are now and then we are hearing sounds of explosions, sometimes during the day and sometimes at night. And but despite this sense, we are seeing that some part of the capital city, they have left to other cities, but many are staying home, but they have been sheltered. There's not that much heavy traffic in the city, but in addition to that, we are seeing some, checkposts in parts of city in order to make sure that the situation is under control. But something which happened a couple of days ago is gatherings, which has been, the government has been asking people to come to the streets or mosque or different places to be present. They want to make sure that, this support can be a backing and can, in addition to the, military responses that Iran is giving to the U.S. and Israel, can be helpful for the country against that foreign aggression. So this is quite the atmosphere in the capital city as well as in some other countries, and many are thinking and asking what could be the future direction of this conflict, and to see how things can proceed.
Okay, Mr. Abbas Aslani, thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
My pleasure, Yalda.
So far, this war has been fought almost completely from the air, but today the Israeli military said it had moved ground troops into southern Lebanon and taken new positions along the border. That's as Hezbollah strongholds just outside the capital were bombarded from above. Our international correspondent John Sparks sent this report from Beirut.
It is the war that few in Lebanon seem to want, but that won't make it go away. Beirut's southern suburbs were repeatedly hit by the Israelis, the streets convulsed by smoke and rubble. The majority here are Shia Muslims, where Hezbollah draws much of its support. And the people of this district feel decidedly insecure. They're targeting all Muslims, but particularly the Shia, said this man. The strikes here in Beirut and in the city of Sidon to the south were triggered by Hezbollah's decision to fire rockets into Israel after the assassination of Ali Khamenei. But their members have not retreated nor disappeared, responding to these attacks with more volleys of their own and plenty of fighting talk. But the Israel Defense Force enjoys total air superiority. An Israeli pilot's view of Beirut here. And it's sending more troops into southern Lebanon to seize new strategic positions, said the defense minister. His boss, the pleased-looking Israeli prime minister, was meeting members of the military and warning the situation in Lebanon would only get worse.
Hezbollah made a very big mistake when it attacked us. We have already responded with force, and we will respond with even greater and additional force. The Lebanese government needs to understand, and the Lebanese people need to understand, that Hezbollah is dragging them into a war that is not theirs.
Dozens of evacuation orders have been issued by the Israelis, warning residents to seek shelter before strikes. But they're not always provided. In the district of Dahia in Beirut, the IDF struck without warning shortly before we were due to visit. Our tour of Dahia, which had been organized by Hezbollah's media arm, has been cancelled. It's just too dangerous to go down there, particularly for them. One of the most densely populated areas of one of the region's greatest cities. It's now cut off. It's totally out of reach. Well over 60,000 people have been displaced by the bombing, and we saw the car parks and the side streets that surround Beirut's central mosque transform into an emergency campground. Rabi and his family have fled from Dahia, and they felt utterly powerless.
Look at the situation we are in. We want to live. We want to live. They are not allowing us to live. We are the smallest country, and everyone else controls it. What's going to happen to us?
Some were looking for people to blame. We heard this family argue about whether Hezbollah were responsible when it fired a volley of rockets on Sunday. The military conflict in Lebanon is fast turning into a humanitarian crisis. A collective state of exhaustion has already set in. John Sparks, Sky News in Beirut.
Let's get another regional perspective tonight. And Mahdi Ghulum is a junior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation Middle East. Thank you very much, Mr. Ghulum, for joining us here on the programme. In the last few days, we've seen luxury hotels hit. We've seen densely populated civilian areas hit. And we understand tonight that the US consulate in Dubai has also been targeted. Can you just give us a sense of the atmosphere there today and over the course of the last few days?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a surprise confrontation. It's a defensive posture that the Gulf has found itself in, being attacked by aggression from Iran. It's a shock for all residents and nationals, citizens in the Gulf, in Bahrain and the UAE. Based in Dubai, I can tell you there's a sense of containment, of control of the situation, but of course there's a fear that the situation could get catastrophic if air defenses fail.
Yeah, and that is a big gaping hole that's been discovered here. That the fact that there is a gap when it comes to these air defences. When you look at say the protection that Israel has, for example, it's now clear that the Gulf states just don't have that, and they're dealing with these, frankly, very cheap drones that are targeting sites at the moment.
Yeah. I'm not particularly sure I agree that the air defenses are of subpar. I think the air defenses have been very impressive, actually. Most of the attacks, close to 1,000 attacks on the UAE, and most of them have been intercepted. In Bahrain, where I'm from, close to 200 total attacks have been intercepted, around 166 exactly per latest figures. The impact has been quite minimal compared to what the catastrophic situation could have been if the air defenses have failed. If I were to criticize, I would say, well,
are there enough of these air defenses? I mean, if President Trump is saying that this war could continue for the next 4 to 5 weeks, maybe longer, and if Iran continues launching these airstrikes, are the Gulf states in a position to be able to sustain it?
I agree. That is a concern. It does vary from country to country. The statistics are out there in terms of the arsenal of the air defenses. It is a concern that the air defenses could not be sustained for a long period. But the hope is that the war would not last for a long period. The attacks by Iran would not last for a long period. And as I was saying earlier, I think one thing that perhaps the Gulf could have invested more in the past, and I have a report coming out soon on that, is sheltering. That's something perhaps we could have learned from Israel before this conflict. Now, so far, there hasn't been a need for proper shelters, but I do think it would have made people feel much safer if they are scared.
You talked earlier about, at the moment, the Gulf states are taking a defensive posturing position. Is there concern that that is going to shift to an offensive position at some point if this carries on?
You know, it hasn't been ruled out. I believe there was an interview, for example, with the advisor to the UAE president, Anwar Gargash, and it was very clear that that is on the table. And I believe that if you know, in coordination with the U.S., there's a need to for the war to get for the Gulf to get involved in the war on a more offensive position. Then that hasn't been ruled out. All the statements that have been issued have expressed the right for the Gulf states to defend themselves. Whether or not that will, you know, significantly alter the situation on the ground in Iran and really, you know, change the nature of their attacks, that I think remains to be seen if it does happen. But it hasn't been ruled out, and I have made, you know, statements in the past and other media interviews that, you know, it's something that it is possible, and it's becoming more likely by the day.
That's concerning that you say becoming more likely by the day. You know, are the Gulf states now preparing for a more prolonged war here?
No, I think the dynamics of the conflict, you know, with the risks to energy security, global energy security, I think President Trump and the U.S. will want to contain this war eventually and not lead to, you know, catastrophic effects on the global economy. And of course, if there's a concern about food security, about air defenses lasting in the Gulf, then there will be, I think, an off-ramp that will immediately be taken by parties to the conflict. But it is a concern. It's something that I think just hangs in the background as a potential that could happen. And I think if the Gulf does decide to join the war, it wouldn't be on the posture of trying to prolong it, but quite to the contrary. It would be on the posture of, you know, shortening it and, you know, on the assumption that it would put almost an imminent end to it.
Mahdi Ghulum, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
I'm just going to show you some pictures that are coming into us which appear to show, let's just have a look at these, a fire which broke out near the US consulate in Dubai. We're just listening there to that guest speaking to us from the UAE. Dubai's media office said it was due to an Iranian drone strike, but that added that it was a limited fire and no injuries have been reported. It took place about 45 minutes, or rather it took about 45 minutes to put the fire out. But it does appear those images that have come into us to be the US consulate in Dubai where that fire appears to have broken out. Now, the economic consequences of the war slammed into Wall Street today as well. The Dow Jones has just closed down more than 400 points. London's FTSE 100 and other markets also fell as investors worry that the war will do real damage to the global economy. That and soaring energy prices overshadowed the Chancellor's spring forecast. Here's our economics and data editor, Ed Conway.
Now, normally when the government unveils a big set of forecasts, which has just happened with the spring forecast, we'd be talking all about that. But obviously there's so much going on with the Iran war and also the implications for the rest of us. It's worth starting by focusing on that. And we'll start with this. This is showing you the wholesale gas price in the UK, the month-ahead gas price, which is typically the one that your bills are based on, but not immediately. So anything happening here won't affect you potentially until the second half of the year. Look at what has just happened here. In the past 2 days, that is up by 98%. Basically, it has doubled over the past 2 days. And two things to note here. First of all, obviously, that looks very scary and very high. Worth saying, if I take the same data and kind of go back, not just the past year, but go all the way back to 2021, what you can see here, that rise, which is basically what I've just shown you there with a different axis, that's the highest since late 2022, but it's nothing like what we saw in the early years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, the rate at which it's changing is pretty much unprecedented. So I want to do the same thing, same data, but rather than looking at the overall levels, this is just looking at the extent to which it changes over any kind of 48-hour period. So, you know, it's up, down, up, down, up, down all the time. But here's what's significant. The latest 48 hours, the rise over that period, basically doubling, is the biggest 2-day increase that we have seen ever So it's actually bigger than any two-day period in the first 2 years of the Ukraine war. So levels are much lower for the time being, thankfully, but the rise is much quicker, much more of a shock on the system. And of course, the big question is now, how long does that last? But what we do know is if it lasts a while, it's going to have a bearing on everything else. And here's one way of thinking about that. We've just had these latest numbers from the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, about inflation in the UK. They are based on the assumption that gas prices, this is kind of a forward curve for gas prices, isn't it? The gas prices stay low. So that's what's baked into the latest forecast from the government. But this is what's just happened. So the price curve has changed completely, suggesting prices are, going pretty much through the roof and then potentially coming down in 2028 or so. And based on that, you have to look at numbers like this. These are the latest inflation forecasts. So that the blue bar is last time around, red bar is this time around. And basically, well, look, inflation's really flat based on this. But if that's not the case, if energy prices push it up, it could be very different indeed. This is showing you kind of one estimate of that. It's from Capital Economics, and they've basically taken their inflation forecast and said, well, look, let's think about a few scenarios. Let's imagine that there is an energy price shock, but it's temporary. Doesn't change things all that much. Inflation still stays close to that dotted line, 2%, which is the Bank of England's forecast. If it's a bigger shock, so energy prices kind of going higher, then, yeah, it's a little bit higher. If it's a longer-lasting shock, then you're not talking about 2%. You're talking about maybe getting towards 3%. All of which is why, this has a bearing on everything, on our livelihoods, on interest rates as well, and it means that the energy price shock we might be just about to live through could have serious consequences.
Just Ed Conway reporting there, but I just want to bring you some breaking news that's just developed in the last few minutes. Qatari authorities say that they've arrested 2 cells affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in the country. So they're saying, that's according to the state news agency, that they've arrested 2 cells affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in their country. So a bit of development there from Qatar. The defense minister of Qatar, of Qatar also has said that Iran launched 2 missiles towards its territory, with one targeting the US-run Al Udeid airbase, but there were no reported human losses. So as we've been discussing throughout the programme, things are really rapidly escalating in the Gulf states as well. And Qatar has just said it has arrested 2 cells affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in the country. So what does success look like for America? What would allow Donald Trump to claim victory in Iran? I've been speaking to 2 men who have some idea. The first is H.R. McMaster, a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General who served as National Security Advisor to President Trump during his first term. Just have a listen to what he said.
I think the objectives are clear in terms of the more narrow objectives of as you heard the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you heard President Trump say, to prevent Iran from threatening the region with these destructive capabilities, especially this missile drone strike complex, which you've seen it use against 10 nations in the region. But of course, I think what everybody's come to the conclusion here, maybe some of them later to it than others, is that really you can't have security for the Iranian people and you can't have security broadly in the region until there's a kind of a fundamental change in the nature of the Iranian government such that it ceases its hostility, to the United States, but really its Arab neighbors and Israel and really its own people, Yalda.
Yeah, but General, what we've seen now is not only over the last 4 days has this regime managed to, survive, but respond and escalate this conflict, really impacting the Gulf states. I mean, just in the last hour or so, I saw images of the U.S. consulate on fire in Dubai.
Yeah, I think this is what you're seeing is the cost and the risk associated with acting. But you have to balance that against the cost and risk of not acting. And if you place what's happening now in context of what the Islamic Republic has done, for the last 47 years, but especially in recent decades in its effort to keep the Arab world perpetually weak by keeping it enmeshed in conflict, by perpetuating sectarian civil wars, supporting proxies and terrorists across the region, from the Houthis in Yemen to the Hashd-e-Shaabi militias in Iraq, to propping up the Assad regime and assisting that regime in the serial episodes of mass homicide in the Syrian civil war. What it's done with Hezbollah, since 1982, and really putting Lebanon into free fall, and using Lebanon as a platform for attacking Israel, Hamas, and building up the capabilities for the October 7th mass murder attacks. I mean, gosh, the list goes on. So I think when faced with the reality that the regime, after the strikes and after the 12-day campaign of June of last year, was racing to reconstitute these capabilities, I think the United States and Israel saw a window of opportunity to deny those capabilities to a regime that, again, is just permanently hostile to the U.S., Israel, and its Arab neighbors.
General, when I've spoken to certain members of the security establishment in Israel, they've conceded that regime change is perhaps not possible, but what they can do is regime destruction on some level, and certainly degrade their military facilities and hit their missiles, the launchers, but the idea, and take out their nuclear facilities. But the idea of bringing about an entire regime change, one that is also managed to divide power in the way that it has, where we're seeing the Revolutionary Guard continue to launch these operations. I mean, I guess the question is, do you actually genuinely think that regime change is possible?
I do think it's possible, but it's hard to tell whether or not it's going to happen, Yalda, because obviously the regime doesn't have to be that strong. It just has to be stronger than any organized opposition. I think what this campaign is doing, in addition to the targets and the objectives that you mentioned, is to weaken the repressive arms of the regime. So in the last 24 hours, you saw the strikes against the MOIS, which is kind of like the Iranian regime's, Gestapo, the attacks against the Basij, the continued attacks against the IRGC leadership. Could that weaken the repressive arms of the regime such that the people, if they come out again to demand a change, that they'll be able to do so successfully in demanding that change? That remains to be seen. I think also, could there be fissures, fractures within the security apparatus of the regime? The Artesh, for example, or the conventional army, will it split away, from those who committed this mass atrocity about 40 days ago? So, I'll tell you, that's the thing about any kind of war. It's this kind of complex interaction between your forces, the enemy forces, complex environments, and of course it unleashes a whole range of emotions that defy any kind of prediction. So I think what we're going to have to do is wait and see, and I think what we should all do is hope that these strikes are successful in preventing the regime from ever again threatening the region with the kind of onslaught you've seen in the last 48-hour period, and then also prevent another mass atrocity like the atrocity that we witnessed 40 days ago.
That was General H.R. McMaster speaking to me there a little earlier. Well, I've also been hearing from former CIA Chief General David Petraeus, who believes the regime will only fall if sections of the armed forces turn against leaders. I began by asking him how he thinks U.S. military operations are going so far.
Well, the Israeli and U.S. strikes have achieved some very substantial goals. Obviously, the supreme leader was killed. A number of the other senior leadership was killed, the defense minister equivalent, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs equivalent, and a number of others. The missile stocks have been degraded, but certainly are still heading at the Gulf states, at Israel, and targets throughout the region. You see a continued and increased effort against drone capabilities. That has proven to be a challenge. I believe that the 6 American soldiers who were killed in Kuwait were killed by drones. So the objectives sought by the U.S. generally, again, I think have been being achieved. We're not there by any means in a number of the categories. Iran, I think, very foolishly has expanded the war as so-called horizontal escalation that brought Hezbollah into it, as you're well aware there in Israel. And that has resulted in substantial strikes by Israel against Hezbollah. We see the Iranian-supported Shia militia in Iraq have conducted a few strikes against U.S. bases in that country, and there has been retaliation for that. But most significantly, I think the big mistake is Iran attacking not just U.S. bases and assets in the Gulf states, but going after the civilian targets in those states as well. The real question, Yalda, though, is can these operations, again, very, very intense, you noted the number of strikes the U.S. alone has carried out, can they create conditions in Iran where some element of the regime forces, perhaps the regular military, rather than perhaps the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which, as you know, is a regime security element, but could break off and galvanize the people and other capabilities to actually topple the regime. I don't think that's the base case just yet. I don't know if there's something going on behind the scenes, perhaps by Israeli and or American intelligence operatives, but that is the big question.
General, you know better than anyone that aerial campaigns alone can't bring about regime change, but you've also seen in places like Afghanistan and Iraq where thousands of troops were sent in, and that didn't bring about the results that the United States wanted. Do you think that the objectives that President Trump has laid out, the Secretary of War has laid out, the Secretary of State has laid out, has been clearly thought out? Because just in the space of 72 hours, each of these objectives seems to sort of change at a head-spinning sort of rate.
First, if I could very respectfully, having known you for decades, I'd submit that we actually did achieve what we sought to bring about in both Iraq and Afghanistan, but that we made a number of mistakes subsequent to that. We fixed those in Iraq. You'll recall the surge in Iraq, which I was privileged to command, drove violence down by nearly 90%, and it stayed down for 3.5 years until the Iraqi government made some egregious errors. And in Afghanistan, we just didn't have the fortitude to stay, even though it was a very sustainable operation for us. But that notwithstanding, you're right that air power alone is not going to bring down a regime.
That was General David Petraeus speaking to me earlier. Well, it's day 4 of the war in the Middle East, and the conflict, as we've been reporting, is widening. Let's go straight to our Cordelia Lynch, who joins me from Tel Aviv. And Cordelia, we've been speaking throughout the program about how this conflict has been widening, especially hitting the Gulf states. What do you think those Gulf leaders, diplomats in the Gulf, will be conveying to Washington tonight?
Well, I think, Yalda, behind the scenes, back-channeling to Washington, they will be trying very hard to try and de-escalate this. They're in an incredibly difficult bind. If they take action, they risk a wider war. But if they do nothing, that also threatens the stability and security of their countries. So I think we will expect to hear those constant conversations continuing. And we know that there was feverish diplomacy leading up to this war when they were trying to prevent these nations reaching this very moment. So there is nervousness, but I think publicly what we are seeing them telegraph is unity, resilience. They're currently in a defensive posture. But at stake here is so much, not just the security, but the optics as well as the economics of these countries. We've seen hotels targeted. We've seen, of course, embassies as well embroiled in this. And I think that kind of exposure that's happened so quickly, and airports too, has led to a lot of anxiety within the region. So there is work to be done. But look, I think there is also a perception that Iran has wildly miscalculated their influence on the situation within the Gulf states. Clearly, Iran was taking the calculus that they would be able to pressure the Gulf states by targeting them to put pressure on the United States to bring this all to an end. But we are not hearing that being signalled from the Gulf states. There is anger at the way Iran has done this, a sense of arrogance from Tehran, and so it has backfired on them. But how this will play out in the next few days and weeks is still very unclear.
Yeah, and Cordy, I have about a minute to go, but obviously this has a massive human toll as well.
Yeah, that's right. We have seen 6 American service personnel killed. That's still a relatively small number, but for Donald Trump, with every casualty, it carries a political risk to him, and hundreds in other countries killed too. But the highest death toll, of course, has been in Iran. The Iranian Red Crescent has put the death toll at 555 people. And of course, we saw that devastating number of casualties from what Iran says was a girls' school. So yes, profound losses. That the single biggest mass casualty event of this war so far, and a high risk we may see more to come.
Cordy, thanks so much for that update. As Cordy was saying, there huge death toll as well. Day 4 of this conflict. We'll be back in the next few minutes, but thank you so much for watching The World.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People